Hello, everyone, and welcome to Integration Down Under, our December meeting. We have a few slides to go through first. The organizers, Martin in Perth, Dan in Brisbane, Mick in Sydney, Wagner in Auckland, and myself in Melbourne. I'm sporting a nice bandage on my hand after having an operation yesterday, but the good thing is when I learned to use a mouse, I learned to use it with my right hand. So we're in better shape than if I had learned to use it with my left hand. So today we have one of the people in the integration industry that I have known for a very long time. And it's been good to get him to present. I will turn over to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, let's start the slides.
Yep.
Here we go.
And
if I'm correct,
there you go.
All right, I'm all visible and loud and clear. Okay.
Yep, you're very good.
All right. Okay, let's go. Yeah, talking to a computer again. So back in the Corona days, I did this too. Kind of nice. Some people don't like it, but yeah, why not? You don't see the people, but yeah, you listen in, or maybe later you will be viewing this recording. So much appreciated. I'm going to talk about insights from 20 years in the enterprise integration space. So it's kind of a talk of what I've done in the past, I would say 20 plus years. Who am I? So I'm Steef-Jan Wiggers. I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm a valuable professional for 15 years plus, mostly in the integration space, BizTalk, and then later on we moved to the SKU of Azure. And that's valuable because you also work with logic apps and stuff. I still do. I'm also an InfoQ editor, if you're not familiar with. So it's infoq.com. So it's a website where you can find all kinds of information about cloud technologies, culture, methods, architecture, machine learning, artificial intelligence. So yeah, it's interesting. You find podcasts, news articles, news items, the stuff that I write predominantly on Azure, AWS, and Google. I'm an integration consultant for 20 plus years. However, not anymore. The present day, I'm a domain architect at VGZ, which is an health insurance company in the Netherlands. So I shifted from consultancy to a different role, however, still working with integration. So the agenda, there's a couple of words here, and there's stuff that I like to talk about, give examples, use cases. I'll talk about all these things that you can see here, from documentation, observability, artificial intelligence a little bit. So yeah, in my career, so I'm going to talk about stuff that I've done in my career. I've been in branches like, or verticals, or industries, whatever you want to call them, banking, insurance, government, logistics, manufacturing, industry. So quite a few. And within that, yeah, I've done over 50 implementations in the various roles. So either as a developer or a project manager, a manager, team lead, architect, designer, doing some operations and support as well. So I've done quite some stuff with integration in various roles. Hence, I'm going to give a little bit of those perspectives in this talk as well. And I can talk about a lot of things. 50 implementations could last over hours, which I don't have, and I don't think you really want to stick along that long. But I'll go over a few things. There's a million things I can talk about, but we'll talk about stuff that I think is interesting. So one of the things is all that with integration you always deal with data. One of the interesting things is that with integration, there's also been a time, and it still is, where you were dealing with Internet of Things. And nowadays, I think it's more called edge computing. And with that data, because data has been generated from a wind turbine. Wind turbine generate energy, but on the other end, they also generate type of data in how much energy is being generated. And in this particular picture, you see that the turbine is basically generating energy, but also emitting events is in how much energy it's generating, as in watts. So through field gateways and databases, cloud gateways, and ultimately in this use case ended up in BizTalk Server. At least BizTalk Server receives all those wind power generated events, which just tells me how much watts was being generated, and ultimately transformed and stored into a database, which ultimately was being exposed, at least the data in the database, into a long-term storage, and then presented towards end users. And the way it looked is that in this case, and this was for a Dutch energy company, we consumed all those energy generated data and presented it in a way that you could see, hey, how much kilowatt is a wind farm producing, and how many households can profit from it. So this is a little bit of a user interface you see here, and then a little bit more detailed of this interface, where you can see facts and figures and the total production. So this is all in Dutch, and these are wind farms that are positioned in the Netherlands. Some are in the North Sea. So imagine if you fly to Amsterdam, you fly over those wind farms. You can see on the left-hand side. So Egmond aan Zee is one which you can see from the air once you land on Schiphol. Once you take off, usually you see those wind farms if it's clear skies. Okay, so this was an example. As many of you, if you work with integration, you deal with data. But then you also deal with the fact that data goes from a source to be your destination. You might have to deal with protocols, and these can be a myriad of protocols. This can FTP, AMQP, or you can even consume something like an OpenAI or WebSocket. An interesting thing with protocols that you always have, somehow you deal with protocols. And this is an example of a hybrid integration solution I built together with colleagues for a manufacturer. So it's more an industry. And this particular example, the FTP or SFTP connector was used to pick up a file that was converted and pushed towards the service bus. So there you're already dealing with protocols. From the service bus, eventually another logic app picked up that message, and then you get to interaction with an ERP system. So in this case, it was a recipe for coloring, and then multiple interactions with an ERP system to get the colors in. So products, consumption, and then specification. This is where you can see that you're already dealing with several protocols. Another example, built a couple of years ago, a hybrid solution. This was Logic App, but also BizTalk Server. BizTalk Server was still used because of on-prem connectivity. So we saw that the on-prem connectivity with the warehouse management system, payrolling system was really good. It was easy to pick up the data and push it towards a Logic App to get it into financial and operations. So BizTalk Server basically picked it up. You did some transformations if necessary, and then it was pushed to your Logic App, which subsequently pushed it to financial and operations, kickstarting a job. Then subsequently another Logic App, as you can see in this picture, is listening to the ERP system to see if that status of the job, basically if the job is finished. You see some logging here in well as a picture. I'll get back to this picture again when we talk about this specific scenario. But here you see that there's also a few protocols being used. And the lesson learned, at least what you're dealing with, and what you've then dealt with all these years, whether it's BizTalk with its adapters or what you've used with connectors in Logic Apps, so that you usually end up using the managed connectors or bindings in functions. And then a lot of times you're working with HTTP. So in the previous example, the interaction with the ERP was not the connectors with Dynamics, but the HTTP connectors, just because they provide more performance. and we're just better suited for what we wanted to do. There's nothing wrong with the connectors in general. You find out of the box with logic apps, but a lot of times you're dealing with the usual suspects when it comes to adapter or to protocols.
Steef-Jan,
Yes.
One thing that I found with a couple of my clients is they wanted to go HTTP because they didn't have to pay connector costs.
That's another variation. True, cost can be a factor. Performance can be a factor. I think Turf van Houten was one of the persons I know, and you know him as well, who written a pretty interesting blog post about the performance of the HTTP connector versus the one from out of the box with Dynamics and Financial Operations. It's just more performant, and it had less limitations.
Yeah.
In general, a lot of the connectors, a lot of things are wrapped around APIs, which you can call, but 9 out of 10 times you're just using the standard protocol HTTP, and usually HTTPS.
Yep.
And going forward with protocols, you also deal with all kinds of formats. So one of the things that a lot of people know, and also Bill, is XML and EDI. It can also be flat file or JSON. And going forward in my career, when JSON became more prominent, people were saying, "Oh, well, this will be the end of XML." No, it's not. XML is still here. 3 years back, I did a big integration solution with a retailer, and EDI is still there. You're dealing with flat files. Although a lot of companies have API-first strategies, whereas REST JSON, you still see also other types of formats still present. Which brings me to another, again, hybrid integration solution, where a business event is being sent from Dynamics 365. Under the hood is basically a table where all these events are being pushed towards, and then through configuration, you can connect or at least have those events pushed towards, for instance, Event Grid. But from Dynamics, you can also do it towards a service bus and so. So you get a JSON message in, or at least within your process or logic app, and then you enrich that message and you push it towards a queue. At least that was the solution here. We're talking about a production order. Subsequently, that JSON message is being picked up, further enriched, but then gets converted to a text file because the ultimate system that gets a production order is not able to consume that JSON, so it gets a text file. So then you're already seeing that you're dealing with JSON on one end and a text file in the end on the other end. Another hybrid integration solution, basically depicting something similar, where you see a business event being pushed, leading to some enrichments. Then you're getting a text message that gets sent to a storage account in the end, or basically Azure files, and then it's been synced to on-prem. But already here you see JSON and text. So the key lesson here, or at least what I see, is that you always will deal with different types of formats when you have all kinds of systems. If it's just system A and system B, and you can deal with one format, fine. But usually in some of the verticals, there's always systems that are not able to consume a JSON. And they want an XML or a flat file, which can be positioned, and so on. Which brings me to another topic that I find interesting, which is solution architecture. When it comes to integration, you do design, or you want to go towards a solution architecture. And what I find, there's many ways that can lead to your solution. For a retailer, we ultimately came up with an integration pipeline, as you can see here. So XML was being sent to a logic app that ends up in a container. And subsequently, we leverage the trigger mechanism through eventing. So when the blob, or at least your workload, ends as a container, then you get a blob created event, which basically triggers a function to pick up that workload and to do something with, like validation. Then push it towards another container where you can do translation. Then you can do processing or mapping towards target. And then ultimately, you'll have it in a container where it can be delivered towards your destination. Interestingly, this type of integration you can also do with, for instance, logic apps and queues. You can do something similar. But this is an integration pipeline that's composable, because that's what you can do. While if you think back about BizTalk, then you can see that some of these steps are in there too. So you receive an XML and an adapter or another format, and it ultimately becomes XML. You can do a transformation. You publish it in a message box. Then you get your subscriber, which you can do push it towards a pipeline, which maps it, and then you get it delivered to another adapter. So this is pretty composable, where you can even add more containers to do more stuff within your integration pipeline if you wish to do so. And if you look at this solution architect, or this type of pattern, we implemented this by pushing product and pricing information through the integration towards intelligent fridges, which subsequently you leverage that information to populate smart fridges with product information, article information, and pricing information. On the other end, you're leveraging the same type of integration pipeline. We receive transactions, which are being pushed towards a data lake. Then some processing is being done that ultimately ends up with the accountants. So that's the representation of what's being sold through those intelligent fridges. But here at 1 and 2, and I would say 3 and 4, is where you find that detailed integration pipeline being leveraged into. And then another type of solution, and this goes back a couple of years too, where already artificial intelligence was present in the form of vision APIs that Microsoft offered. Now it's through Open API, but this is a solution that even Microsoft built, I think, from the bridge towards Seattle to Redmond. You have this bridge where they have these cameras that take a picture of your car, and then ultimately they look at if they can find you registration, so then they can bill you. If they cannot find you, then they would send you a letter or an email saying, hey, you have to pay for it. And this is kind of how the solution looks like. You find event grid here. You find some functions here. Functions that do the storage of your license plates, but also calling the computer vision API that extracts the license plate using optical character recognition. So even these days, I worked for another company for a bit that also did something with OCR, but not leveraging computer vision anymore, but other types of models to extract that data. So this solution, a couple of years old, still applicable, maybe other types of technology currently present in Azure, but it's a solution where also integration can be a part of. Another interesting one back in the day was brand and campaign management, where you could have a template installed where you have logic app functions and where you can ingest tweets, which subsequently are being visualized in Power BI, so you can see what the sentiment is. And even Microsoft leverages this themselves by ingesting tweets with logic apps and functions and pushing them into a database, and then do a lookup in CRM to see what kind of sentiment it is at some customers about some of their products, and then reach out to them saying, hey, how can we help them? The key thing here I want to say is that I've showed you some stuff of solution architecture, is that there's no one size fits all solution. So you always need to find the right fit. Something that I applied also with one of the customers, that every time you just look at the set of technology or at least services you have and what type of solution you go for, and which is fit for purpose, instead of always doing the same thing. The integration pipeline that I just showed was an example that could be reused a couple of times in some of the domains, but was not always fit for purpose. There were other situations where we leveraged the components but built another type of solution. And then something about documentation. I know a lot of developers, and you and I sometimes don't like document, but it is important. One of the interesting things that I've applied now a couple of times with customers is something like called an architecture design record. So you have a simple text format in a markdown. You have some room made for inline diagrams. The headers, some of the information includes ID, date, status, and you can check it into source control if you leverage something like a GitHub or Azure DevOps. And we applied these IDR templates leveraging Azure DevOps, where you put in some context about some of the decisions that you've made, and you made some of the documentation too. So the example you see here is secure by data exchange. Something we implemented, accepted it as a status, and this is what we're going to use. SFTP for emails or large files, and OAuth for your API. And this is the way to get information either through messaging or through bulk. And these decisions are you make and you document is something that if someone comes into your company or people start wondering, hey, why did we decide this? Then you can look back and read back what you've decided. This is an example why I feel that you should always document. Now we're getting to another topic which is interesting and something that I've worked with for quite a while too, and a lot of projects is security. Whether it's crypto, whether it's depending on identity and access management or using secure protocols. It's always interesting and something that you should use. So I've done a project with BizTalk called the BCT, which is the taxi project, which basically comes down to the fact that like lorry drivers, they're obligated to have this tachograph in their car that registers when they drive and when they rest. They can't be driving 24 hours. They need to have their resting periods during their work as well. If they don't, then they get a fine. So that's what tachograph basically is, a proof of how much time you were behind the wheel and working and what time you were resting. And the Dutch government decided that this should be similar for taxi drivers. So I was involved in a project where BizTalk Server had the function of one end you had a device, and the device also needed a card, a personalized card. So the personalized card had to be asked for. This is kind of what you see here is in Dutch, but you see on the left-hand side, and you have to ask for that. You have to register for the fact, hey, I'm a taxi driver and I need a card because I'm going to have that device installed at some point in time. BizTalk Server basically went to see if the person was a citizen of the Netherlands. It checked if the insurance was right, and if they also had a valid driver's license. And if that all worked, then they would ask for a personalized card. So this was just going back and forth using HTTPS and certificates with these instances you see on, or entities you see on the left-hand side. Going forward, more modern, is that you apply OAuth 2. And this is a diagram of what you basically would do. You register your API within Entra ID. Then you also have another app registration where you share some of the information with a calling party, which would call for that token, and they basically pass that token through an API gateway so that you can call, if you're authorized and identified, to call a function. So this is something you also can see back in Microsoft Learn. But this is something we applied, or at least what I applied a lot when it comes to API management and defaulting to OAuth 2. This is kind of the mechanism that you use. An example of such a thing is an integration solution completely in Azure. So what you see here is that Salesforce pushes an event through API management, which is secured. So there's always security going on OAuth, so that you can Salesforce can push that event. Logic App was then an intermediate to get that event into a proprietary event grid message that's being pushed to event grid, and then on the other side you have an API or a Logic App that calls through API management Salesforce again. And then you see that policy here, where you see some security too, because you basically need a token every time you call Salesforce to get some of the information out. The information coming back is subsequently transformed and pushed towards another service, again with API management in the middle, leveraging that OAuth 2 security mechanism I just showed you. So the lesson learned here is basically that you should never ignore security, whether it's identity, access, authorization, or data. You will always deal with security. And these days, what's more applicable is called zero trust. So basically always verify and trust no one. Even today, the solutions we're building, we're basically have to deal with zero trust because it's enforced by a cybersecurity center or other entities within an organization. You could say, hey, apply zero trust. And then another interesting topic, or at least something that I like to, is operations. I've had this role for a while too, and it's pretty interesting to deal with incidents and resolve those. And I'm getting back to the solution that I described earlier. That's this solution with a warehouse management system, payroll, and pushing the information to BizTalk Server, and then it gets to a logic app, and then that pushes it towards a job within Dynamics 365, which then starts processing, and then later on you get your status. And you see some errors here where you start doing logging. So you log some of the information centrally, or at least to one point, which is a service bus namespace or a queue. And there you have logic app listening and pushing all that data into a Cosmos DB. And on top of that Cosmos DB, there's a simple dashboard, able to call a function to look at the original measures, also to look at some of the other information. But all the information is gathered towards one single point, I would say database, and then you have a dashboard in front of it. And this is the example of the dashboard that we implemented, where you can see all the steps of those, going from BizTalk all the way into Dynamics 365. And here you see some of the steps. So we received it, send it, and so on. And also where you can view the original file name or import it. And the interesting stuff, or at least the capability we leveraged here for the centralized monitoring solution was, on one hand, Cosmos DB, but it also had an interesting capability called change feed. So every document inserted or every information being inserted into document DB, or at least into Cosmos DB, basically generated a trigger, a change feed, which then subsequently is being pushed towards a function with the necessary binding, and then it will look if there's an error or something in that information that it's received. If so, it pushes to the blob storage, which then subsequently triggers a logic app and notifies the team that needs to be notified. So instead of having an alert sent to everyone, it's really sent towards the functional team in this case. So it's pretty targeted. And they would receive something like this and look into it and see how they can resolve it. Which leads to the fact that something that I've learned early on at a big oil company, that you always need to kind of have a support model in place too when you do operations for your integrations as one. So there's a ticket being issued, then you look at it, whether it's a technical or functional. If it's functional, then a business analyst or someone else can resolve it. If it's technical, then you start analyzing it and see what you need to do to resolve it. And if second tier doesn't know what to do, you're getting to the third tier technician that can also analyze, resolve, or escalate to vendor, aka your cloud vendor, if it's a cloud-based solution. Going forward, so that mechanism I just showed you for that hybrid integration, I'm coming back to that integration pipeline at the retailer because we built something similar again. You see all these intermediate steps. All these intermediate steps lead to the fact that all those intermediate steps send some type of data, kind of similar data, towards a topic, which then is being read by functions. One function pushes it into a lot of analytics workspace, and then you have Power BI on top of it. That's more for dashboarding and so on. And then you have another function which pushes it into Cosmos DB. Again, you have the change feed factor, change feed capability. So if there's an error, then that function would, with an integration with Topdesk, which is an incident management system, push it towards there, where all kind of action groups are being configured, and basically leading to the fact that the right person can look into the issue and see whether it's technical or functional, and then deal with it. So this is kind of an observability I've built. Back in the day, you had BizTalk activity monitoring. In BizTalk, you still have it with logic apps, and you're kind of doing similar things where you can look into your process and maybe find out what kind of order failed and that kind of stuff. I built this custom solution twice, once for the hybrid, but also for this particular case. And it works. It works in a way that you can reduce the mean time to identify where in your process something goes wrong and how to mitigate it depending on the process you've built around it. I'm not saying this is the best solution. There are other solutions that you can even buy you can buy those solutions in the market as well. So this is a more tailor-made solution which can help in a certain way when it comes to dealing with incidents within your integrations. So lessons learned here is more like, focus on observability also from the start. So building a solution is one, and that usually is about 20-25% of the life cycle of your solution, while the other percentage, 75, maybe 80%, is where the solution lives in production and where it needs to be maintained. So it's obvious that you have to think about observability too, because your solution most of the time lives in production. So yeah, it needs to be monitored. And one of the things you need to do is have a correlation ID from the get-go to track all those events. So in the previous example, we also started with a correlation ID that every time you push a message towards the queue that ends up in a document or in a Cosmos DB, has that correlation ID, so you can bundle them together and see if your process is complete or where it fails. You need to do structured logging and provide it with rich metadata. So kind of that's what we did. We did structured logic logging, I would say, providing with metadata around your information that you send towards your central logging. And one of the things that's very important is that you should definitely focus more on alerting than on dashboarding, because no one's going to look at the dashboard or click F5 constantly. You wouldn't even do that back in the day in BizTalk, when you wouldn't press F5 all the time. You need some time of alerting and know when you receive the alert where in your process or integration you have an issue. That's very important. And with that, I would say, enjoy building integration. I hope you learned something from this, what I've talked about, or maybe you recognize stuff, or you think, hey, I've done something similar, which is cool, or you did something else, that's cool too. So yes, thank you very much for listening in. And it's very early here, so I still have a full work day ahead of me, and I hope some of you will enjoy the evening or the afternoon.
I've got an interesting question for you, because I've been thinking about this lately.
Okay.
Is about the transition away from BizTalk that needs to happen in the next 4 or 5 years. One of the biggest things that I'm questioning is, in these organizations that have BizTalk, how many have it documented to know what it's doing?
That's a very good question.
And I think from what I've seen in a lot of organizations now is that all the people that develop the solutions, because a majority, I know in Australia, a majority of the solutions were developed around BizTalk 2010, 2013, 2013 R2. All of those developers are long gone from those organizations. And I had one organization, they tried to rebuild their solution in MuleSoft without actually reading the BizTalk code. They went back to the business users and says, what's it supposed to be doing? And as it turned out, it was doing nothing like what it was supposed to be doing under the covers. So they rebuilt it in Mule, and basically it took about 5 goes to get it rebuilt in Mule doing the exact same thing. So your comment about documentation, I think, is a very, very interesting one. And the other point that I'd like to bring up too is that, you're talking about some of the structured logging and things like that. One of the arguments I've made and with a couple of customers about whether to use logic apps or use functions. For integration work, I really think the way logic apps exposes all the information between each action is gives you much easier debugging than having to go through something like App Insights or Log Analytics from your function when you're trying to debug that.
Could be, depending on your development team. So I work with or engineers actually.
Yeah.
With some good engineers that definitely also knew their way around log analytics with finding the right K-SQL queries, so the custom queries.
But actually, it's more about those support people, the operations people.
If it's more functional, then yeah, you're right.
Because so and that's one of the interesting things that I've seen is that that the expertise in the KQL for log analytics and things like that is a lot less available than it should be. And you get being able to look at the logic apps and look at what's happened in the run and things like that seems to and integration is one of those things, especially if you're integrating with a lot of third parties. They'll change something. And the new message will come in, it fails because the mapping's not right or the validation's wrong or something like that. And depending on and this is the other thing that I ran into, is that a lot of people were trying to cut down how much logging they were generating out of their apps. So they weren't logging payloads and things like that. So it made it very hard to discover through logging, but much easier through the logic apps, being able to look at what failed in the logic app. But it's an interesting discussion I'm having with a couple of customers at the moment. So
I can imagine, yeah.
How are you, Dan? You've joined us after we started.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit late. I had to get out of a work meeting because it's still work hours here in Queensland.
Yeah. So, but thank you very much again for your insight into that. I think it's very interesting, and I've heard a couple of talks lately that have been around people's expertise and their history and things like that, and then they've been very, very insightful and things like that to give people an idea of kind of when they look at some of these systems, why they were done the way they were done and things like that. So,
yeah,
because I know working with a group of developers that are really more web-based than integration-based, you have a different kind of mind focus on how things work. And let's see. Thank you very much. And that's pretty much all we have for today. I will end the live stream now, but for those people that are viewing and want other people to view, it'll be up on the Integration Down Under website in our playlist, and you'll be able to point people to theirs to have a view of that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Looking forward to any feedback